Hello and welcome to today's Friends Life Care Vigor webinar, Psychological Consequences of COVID-19. My name is Katie Starantino. I am a Friends Life Care Wellness Care Coordinator, and I will be your host for today's webinar. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items with you. The links to today's handout are in the confirmation email that you received an hour before the webinar. The handout link will also be included in the follow-up email that you received tomorrow afternoon with a link to the recording of today's presentation. While there is not a chat feature for today's presentation, you may submit questions by clicking on the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. If you don't see the Q&A feature on your computer, you can run your cursor over the bottom of the screen and you'll see it. Each of today's presenters will answer questions at the end of their presentation. Today's program is full of great information, so you may want to wait and see if your question is answered during the presentation before submitting it. I would now like to introduce our speakers, Dr. Anna Zakachenko and Dr. Cherian Verghese. Dr. Zakachenko is a licensed psychologist and clinical assistant professor at the Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine. Her specialties include, but are not limited to, health psychology, healthy aging, and bereavement issues. She serves on the Geropsychology Committee of the Pennsylvania Psychological Association and has extensive experience providing psychological services and consultations to older adults and older adult communities. Dr. Verghese is a board-certified psychiatrist and neurologist and is a leader in the field locally and nationally. He is the medical director of Keystone Clinical Studies and assistant professor of psychiatry at Temple University. His company has worked on the clinical development of over 11 new medications and are actively working on novel medications to treat depression and Alzheimer's disease. I'm going to hand it over to you now, Dr. Zakachenko. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katie. Appreciate it. And thank you for having me this afternoon, and Dr. Verghese as well. I'm going to be sharing for the first half of the presentation, and then Dr. Verghese. So I'm going to start at the beginning here. And just to tell you a little bit about myself in the context of the pandemic. We've all had a lot of challenges to face, and some of the challenges that I've encountered have been in healthcare, in providing continued services to my patients and clients, as well as teaching our students. At the Osteopathic College, we have a psychology training program. So when the pandemic started, it's not only that we were observing anxiety in our patients, but also in our employees and in our students. And we're speaking about students that are training to be physicians and psychologists. So I would say that the pandemic really provided us a way to more deeply reach our community members and to work with them, overcoming the challenges, and then also an opportunity to get to know our students on a deeper level and help them grow and mature. So in spite of the losses and the difficulties in the pandemic, I think that there have been some very good things that have come out of this and opportunities for growth. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the stress management techniques and ways that we've been working with clients and patients in our community in helping them manage the psychological consequences of COVID-19. So my topic is resilience during a pandemic, and the term resilience is thrown around a great deal. It's become sort of a buzzword, and I'd like to talk a little bit more in detail about what it really means to nurture resilience. And when I think of resilience during the pandemic, I think about how I've worked with my patients to create some meaning out of this crisis, and how I've helped them create meaningful structure in their lives in a time of uncertainty, and to maintain connections. We've had a lot of patients and friends and students talk about feelings of isolation. And now, as we're emerging from the pandemic, I think the anxiety that we see might continue, but in a different way, because we're reemerging and we're having to adhere to different guidelines. So it's still a time of uncertainty. So what we're going to look at is pandemic-related distress. We're going to define and describe what resilience is. I'll talk a little bit about PERMA, the theory of well-being that has been spearheaded by Dr. Martin Seligman in the positive psychology movement. And there are some links for reading material if you wish to do so after today's presentation. How we nurture resilience and the role of values when we manage pandemic-related anxiety, and things like behavioral activation, which is a strategy for creating structure in our lives and improving our mood. So in terms of COVID-related distress, there were researchers early on back in March of 2020 who started examining what was happening with COVID-related distress. And the way that I can explain it is, as a psychologist and a healthcare provider, we were seeing many more patients coming into either coming into our office or reaching out to us through televisits and describing these physical symptoms of anxiety. And the way that the researchers describe this is that there's physiological hyperarousal, where there's an actual fear response. The person is feeling threatened. They're experiencing anxiety and physiological symptoms like a racing heart, startling and constant worry, and fear of illness or fear of losing a loved one or the loss of income. And that has continued as people have tried to hang on to their jobs, or they've had to restructure how they work. So I like to use the example of a cat. Any of you, if you've been pet owners, if you've ever seen what your cat does when they're frightened, how they're arching their back and getting ready to either attack and defend themselves or to run. And that's actually what happens to our bodies when we're in psychological distress. So the researchers created what they called the coronavirus anxiety scale. And the items related to things like feeling dizzy, lightheaded, or faint when a person read or listened to news about the coronavirus. They reported trouble falling or staying asleep because they were thinking about the coronavirus, or it could also be when we had cases of civil unrest over the past year. I've had older patients tell me that they feared going to sleep at night because of civil unrest. Reporting that they felt paralyzed or frozen when they thought about or where they were exposed to information about the coronavirus, loss of interest in eating when they thought or were exposed to info about the virus, or felt nauseous or had stomach problems when they thought or were exposed to information about the virus. So you can see that the virus or thinking about the virus or coming or being exposed to maybe newscasts about the virus were actual triggers for anxiety. So what the researchers did when they studied this COVID-19 distress, they found that people who, in the beginning, when they reported social isolation, these folks were reporting decreased coronavirus-related anxiety. And what that meant was that people who actually had isolation measures in place, they were doing things like wearing masks, they were limiting exposure with others, and they weren't traveling, that they had a greater sense of control and predictability in their lives. So basically they found those who sheltered in place and ceased long distance travel reported less belief violation and less physiological anxiety about the pandemic. And one of the ways that we explain this is that with the pandemic, our core beliefs about safety in the world were really tested. Things that we would have normally done before, like just going shopping or taking a walk or going to a medical appointment, those were drastically changed. But the patients who reported that they didn't engage in a lot of travel and they had a structured schedule, they seemed to actually do better in terms of distress. So some of the things that emerged from the research and some strategies that had been recommended were limiting social media exposure to times when we were only connecting with our loved ones. So a way to sort of explain this is that if we're constantly exposed to social media about the virus or other disturbing topics, we're basically saturated and we're putting ourselves in a state of hyperarousal. We're triggering anxiety. So for a period of time, and I was doing this as well, I was recommending to my patients to limit time on Facebook and watching social media, but to make sure that they were using social media in a way where they were connected with their loved ones. And a perfect example is having a Zoom meeting with one's grandchildren and actually helping them do their homework. And I was able to do this, and I found that it was really rewarding in terms of staying connected. Another strategy is to maintain a daily schedule, and planning and engaging in specific activities can improve mood. So what we would discuss with our clients would be, even though you might be sheltering in place or some of the places that you would like to go, you can't, and you're limited, let's think of things that you could do at home or in a safe environment so that you could continue to improve your mood as time went on. We recommended exercise, and movement is a good activity in terms of eliciting good chemicals in our bodies and endorphins. And we had to strategize with patients about how they would exercise because the gyms were all closed and senior centers were closed. So we were problem solving about how could you exercise at home? Would you use videotapes? Would you be on Zoom meetings? Would you use the internet for something like this? And then self-soothing activities. And self-soothing activities could mean something as simple as having a daily ritual at a certain time of having a relaxing cup of tea, maybe taking a nice hot bath, meditating, doing some yoga, anything that would really soothe the soul and soothe what we were seeing as hyperarousal, where the person was quite anxious. So we would recommend practicing activities which calm the body, and some of these include progressive muscle relaxation and diaphragmatic breathing, and practicing social distancing and safety measures leading to a sense of control over our world. And so when I would work with my patients in the televisits, we would talk about how social distancing would help make them feel safer in the moment and over the course of the pandemic. And then we would talk about some of the interventions, which we would call behavioral activation and meaningful activities. And so what we find with anxiety and depression is that clients will say that they've decreased their engagement in things that used to bring meaning to their lives or bring them pleasure. And so again, within the confines of the pandemic and sheltering in place, and even as we emerge from the pandemic, we're still working with our clients to identify things that bring them joy and are consistent with their values. So meaningful activities could be things like gardening. It could be something like taking a walk outside. For some of our clients who were not actually attending church services, some of them learned how to use the computer and they attended virtual services. So some strategies included yoga and mindfulness-based stress reduction activities, time out from exposure to the media, sleep hygiene, maintaining a consistent sleep schedule. had numerous clients telling me, whether they were previously working or not, that they had fallen out of their previous sleep schedule and that their sleep patterns were off, and that was actually making them feel worse. Building virtual communities of care. And this is where we had to be creative, and we continue to be creative in terms of reaching out to people that we are close to, be it our spiritual community or maybe a civic group that we're close to, but still being connected to them and being involved in activities. Engaging in spiritual practices. I have a client who talks about attending virtual Bible study every week. And the last one is bonding with our pets, because that provides soothing to us. So again, when we're in a state of hyperarousal and we're like the cat that has its back up and its fur is sort of protruding because it's frightened, we want to do something that's going to soothe us. And so spending time with pets and our cats and our dogs, which I think some of them have actually gotten spoiled during the pandemic. I know my dog has. He's gotten accustomed to my being at home. So now I want to shift into this concept of resilience. And as I said before, this is a term that has been thrown around a lot. And I wanted to take a moment to more deeply describe it so that we have what I think a deeper, more intense understanding of it, and not a superficial understanding of it. It's the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress. And individuals that exhibit this quality of resilience, they're the ones that perceive the trauma as an opportunity for profound growth. Their camera lens is different. They take it as an opportunity to continue to grow and expand themselves. They can use the trauma as a time for reflection. In my work with my clients over the past year, we've talked a lot about what has become most important to you during this timeout and sheltering in place. And many patients have said it's given them time to think about what's most important in their lives. I have some patients who have decided to leave a particular line of work because they're finding that they're just not as satisfied. They're more sensitive to this idea of limited time on this earth, so they want to use it well. I've had other clients who are older who have said that I'm going to move closer to my family. I want to be close to my grandchildren. So the pandemic, in this process of developing resilience, it's really given us an opportunity to think about what's most important and how we want to align the behaviors in our lives with our values. So what is not resilience? It doesn't mean that a person won't experience difficulty or distress. It doesn't mean that the person is undergoing the trauma and things are just rolling off their backs. It's not that. The road to resilience is likely to involve considerable emotional distress, but it is one of where the person tries to transcend the experience. So examples of resilient individuals, what I would invite you to do is to take a moment and think of someone in your life who you would describe as resilient, or think of a famous individual who exemplified resilience. And when we think of those individuals, we can get in touch with the qualities of resilience and why they are important to us. So I think of Anne Frank and her quote here, "I still believe in spite of everything that people are truly good at heart." When I think of the story of Anne Frank, of how she took a really tragic experience, right, and surmounted it and transcended it, essentially. So what are some elements of resilience? It takes time and intentionality. It's a way of being in our lives. It is not something that is a reflex. It takes time to develop. And there are 4 components, and that is connection, wellness, healthy thinking, and meaning. And it empowers the individual to withstand and learn from difficult and traumatic experiences. Some of the pillars are described as self-awareness, mindfulness, self-care, and positive relationships with ourselves and with others. So just a thought here that is going to be an entree into the PERMA theory of positive psychology, which I think has a lot of relevance for us now during and after the pandemic. And that is, as people, we want to cultivate the best version of ourselves and live a meaningful life. It's more than surviving. They want to grow their capacities for love and compassion, creativity and curiosity, work and resilience, and integrity and wisdom. So with that, I'd like to talk a little bit about this idea of positive psychology and share with you some of the really pivotal figures in positive psychology. Martin Seligman could be referred to as the grandfather or father of positive psychology, as well as Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who has a longer last name than I have. He developed the psychological concept of flow, and that's really a highly focused mental state conducive to productivity. And I'm going to talk about some of these elements right now. So in PERMA, in Dr. Seligman's theory of well-being, he wanted to study what is human flourishing and what enables it. And the PERMA is a theory of well-being, and it's his attempt to answer the fundamental questions. And there are 5 building blocks that enable flourishing: positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. And there are techniques to increase each. So we're talking about engagement, and that could be engagement in activities or in organizations or with other people. Relationships, experiencing positive emotion, creating meaning, and having accomplishment in our lives. So we can increase positive emotion about the past by cultivating gratitude and forgiveness, our positive emotion about the present by savoring physical pleasures and mindfulness, and our positive emotion about the future by building hope and optimism. So one of the techniques that sometimes we teach our clients in terms of mindfulness is enjoying a physical pleasure, and that could be tasting different foods while sitting down and then describing them and taking a moment to really savor that. And a positive emotion exercise might be documenting each evening at bedtime 3 things which went well during the day. And in the research, or Seligman's research, participants who engaged in this reported lower depression scores over a 3-month period. So this is an activity that I will recommend to my clients. Journaling is a positive thing. However, we never want someone ending their evening on a negative note. So when they're journaling, we try to keep it focused and have them thinking about things that went well during the day so that they're experiencing gratitude and a positive emotion. A gratitude exercise could be identifying one individual who helped you and writing a letter of gratitude and delivering that to the individual. And with respect to engagement, we're talking about fully deploying skills, strengths, and attention for a challenging task. So Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi developed this idea of the experience called flow, and this was after many years of his research. And that is that these are experiences that are so gratifying that people are willing to do it for its own sake rather than for what they will get out of it. And that is the activity is its own reward. And their concentration is fully absorbed in the moment. So examples could be things like fixing a bike or riding a bike, gardening, becoming immersed in that, sports training or performance, and our self-awareness disappears when we're in these activities, and the perception of time is distorted in retrospect. Time stops, and some examples could be a good conversation, a work task, playing a musical instrument, reading a book, writing, or building furniture. And then the other dimension would be relationships. And this is something that's fundamental to well-being. And some of us may foster and nurture relationships really well. It may come easy to us. For others, it may be a bit more difficult. The experiences that contribute to well-being are often amplified through our relationships. So if you think about something that you've really enjoyed, maybe you've listened to a YouTube video of a piece of music that you really love, or you've attended a virtual concert. It's really nice when we can talk to someone else about it and share that, and either have them with us or at least be able to tell them about that experience. Connections to others can give life purpose and meaning. Support from and connection with others is one of the best antidotes to the downs of life and a reliable way to feel up. Research shows that doing acts of kindness for others produces an increase in well-being. And from an evolutionary perspective, it's the drive to connect with and serve others promotes our survival. Developing strong relationships is central to adaptation and is enabled by our capacity for love, compassion, kindness, empathy, teamwork, cooperation, and self-sacrifice. So some of you may have experienced this in your communities during the pandemic. I know that in our urban community here, this was something that we did as neighbors during the pandemic, when there were restrictions on shopping for food. Having one person who would call other neighbors and say, is there something that you need? I'm going out to the market. If there's someone who is housebound and can't get around, bringing them food. So I would say that the pandemic was really a test of how well we could behave with each other as neighbors. And then meaning. A sense of meaning and purpose can be derived from belonging to and serving something bigger than the self. There are various societal institutions that enable a sense of meaning, such as religion, family, science, politics, work organizations, justice, the community, social causes, among others. One of the things that I observed with our medical students here during the pandemic is that some of them were trained to provide vaccines and others to do different kinds of outreach. And my observation as an assistant professor, this is really where I really got to see them grow and mature very, very nicely. And then accomplishment. This is another aspect of emotional well-being. People pursue achievement, competence, success, and mastery for its own sake in a variety of domains, including the workplace, sports, games, and hobbies. People pursue accomplishment even when it does not necessarily lead to positive emotions, meaning, or relationships. So accomplishment is important in our lives. And during the pandemic and even thereafter, as we get older, if our physical or if our physique begins to decline and we might start thinking that we're doing less than we did before, it's really important to be engaged in activities which lead to a sense of accomplishment, regardless of our age or our status in life. So what are the benefits of well-being? And this has actually been studied through research. There's better work performance, reporting of more satisfying relationships, more cooperation, stronger immune systems. And this is a very strong argument that I will use in terms of working with clients when we're talking about developing these activities and improving their well-being, that if they're in a better emotional state, over the long run, it is really going to help them with their immune systems and their overall health. It's correlated with reduced cardiovascular mortality, fewer sleep problems, lower levels of burnout, greater self-control, better self-regulation and coping abilities, and becoming more pro-social. So in terms of a life worth living, we ask our patients, and when I do this work with my patients, we determine which values are most important to you, and that could be values of spirituality, family values, civic responsibility, physical health or learning, and then determining activities which represent these values, and then committing to engaging in at least one activity per day. So an example might be a grandparent who says to me, I want to improve my health. I value my health. It's going to give me an opportunity to be on this earth for a longer period of time, to see my grandchildren grow up. So they may say that they hold the value of improved health. And then we talk about how can you improve your health? And so maybe they make a commitment to walk on a daily basis or to go biking a few times a week, planning a healthy meal, cooking a healthy meal with a loved one. And that also would create a sense of community and connectedness. Okay. So I wanted to leave you with some positive psychology resources. And this is the website for the Authentic Happiness modules at the University of Pennsylvania, and the Authentic Happiness website that's developed by Dr. Seligman. And a reading material might be using the new positive psychology to realize your potential for lasting fulfillment. If you Google Dr. Martin Seligman, you'll discover that there are several self-help books that he has written. And then the psychology of flow as well. So in summary, in terms of pandemic-related distress, we're trying to help to teach people to self-soothe, to do activities that are soothing to themselves so that they're decreasing their physiological arousal, limiting social media so that we're not saturated with negative images, and adhering to a daily schedule. That's because structure helps us feel secure. And in a time of uncertainty, it's important to feel more secure. Exercising, that actually improves our mood, and connecting with loved ones in whatever way that we can, be it virtual or in small gatherings. And then engaging in meaningful activities like learning a new skill or a hobby. And I'm going to allow for some questions now. I'll try to respond to those. And if there aren't any, that's fine. I am going to take this, give this over to Dr. Verghese, my colleague here, who is going to talk about clinical depression and COVID-19.
Thank you, Dr. Zakachenko. That was great. We do have a question for you.
Okay.
What about the role of seeing and creating art?
That's wonderful. And whoever brought that up, thank you. Art is it's a powerful therapeutic modality. And I'm glad that someone is mentioning it. When we talk about inviting clients and patients and creating experiences in our daily lives that are going to create meaning but also improve our mood, it's important for us to look at the arts. So there might be, a person who plays an instrument, and maybe they've stopped doing that for a while, and they begin engaging in it again. And they might say, well, you know what, because of my arthritis, my fingers on the piano are not as fluid, but I'm still enjoying it. Or someone who is a painter and is using visual art. Maybe they're finding during these times of emotional turbulence that actually painting is something that's therapeutic for them. So the arts are really quite therapeutic, and I think it's part of a sensory experience that can really improve our mood. And yes, I would highly recommend using the arts.
Yes, thank you. That was a great question. Thank you for being with us. And that was the last question we had for you. So we'll pass it over to Dr. Verghese.
Thank you. So Dr. Verghese, do you want me to leave this up because I'm going to have to exit out of the meeting?
Hi. Yes, I can just continue on from here. Would that work, Kate?
I think it might be best for you to share your screen because she's going to have to shut down her computer.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Zakharchenko.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been a pleasure being a guest here. Thank you.
It's been a little over a year since we did this, and things have improved quite a bit. And it's such a blessing that we're all here and
Agreed.
alive relatively well. So
Thank you.
thanks a lot. Take care.
Take care.
Can you see this?
Not yet.
Not yet. Let me share screen.
There we go. Yep. We have your email there.
Yep. I want you to see my email and my dealings with Swiss financial companies. Just kidding. Okay. All right. Are we good to go?
Yeah, I think if you click slideshow at the top there and should say from the beginning. So slideshow right at the top. Yeah, if you go over, there you go, right down a little bit, it'll say slide. Ooh. Yeah, right there. Perfect.
Show thumbnail video.
It should say slideshow. You're right there. If you click that, and we should have from the beginning.
I don't see anything.
Okay. I think that. Let's see if. Well, we can still see it. Do you see where it says? Oh, there you go. Perfect. There it is.
This is a full screen. Okay.
Great.
All right. Can I get going?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. Hello, everybody, and thank you, folks from Friends Life Care, for joining this, and appreciate Gail's energy and Katie's for putting this together. I have worked with Friends Life Care for many years, and some of you know me as the Alzheimer's disease research guy, which I am, and we also do clinical trials for people with major depressive disorder. And this is a good segue from Dr. Zakharchenko's lecture. She talked about, psychological things, mind things that we can do. And being a physician and a neuroscientist, I look at it from a slightly different perspective, that is of brain. Having said that, we can't really separate mind from brain or mind from body. They are one entity, just that the experience of it varies. So my disclosure is that I do conduct trials for major depressive disorder, and we are Keystone Clinical Studies. The name Keystone was chosen because just like the keystone in a bridge, which connects the two ends of the river, we, a clinical trial site, are the connector between basic sciences, where you're looking at molecules and neurons, and the clinical world, which is real people like yourselves. So what I'd like to look at is understand mind-brain relationships a little bit, and talk about the clinical features of depression, or features of clinical depression or major depressive disorder, and understand that the mind and the body don't exist in watertight compartments. Depression has an effect on your physical health and also your family and your community around you, and what we can do about it. So, most of us, especially high functioning people, like to think that we are fully in control of ourselves, and the master of my fate or and the captain of my destiny, or the other way around. But we really are subject to our biology. A simple thing I can say is, when was the last time you felt really hungry or needed to go to the bathroom? Could you have sat and solved a math puzzle then, or done a crossword at the time? No. Your biology impels you to do something, or when you're really tired and sleepy. There was a famous study done in Israel, I believe, where they were looking at people who got paroled by the justice system, folks who got put back in jail and those who were sent out on parole. And they couldn't figure out a pattern on who gets paroled. They looked at the type of crime, the victim, the race of the person, the age, sex, couldn't get a pattern till someone had a bright idea of looking at what time of day the judge made the decision. And these are people who are trained judges who are meant to be impartial as human beings can be. And they found that your best chance of being paroled was within 2 hours of the judge having had a meal. So if your case came up at 11:30, you're going back to jail. If your case came up at 1 o'clock, you're probably getting paroled. That is the effect of biology on human thinking and behavior. Now, along with this, there are a number of social and familial factors in terms of how we look at feelings and feeling states as a society. The best example of this would be in the 80s, a British psychiatrist did a study in the Yoruba tribe of Nigeria. So those are the people who put the beads in their hair, which came across to the US as well. Uh, they don't have a word for depression in their language. And yet they had a lot of people who complained of tiredness and sleeplessness and body aches and so on, put them on antidepressants, and all of that went. So the way people look at things is often determined not just by their biology, but the society in which they live in. I trained in India in the first part of my career, and indeed you see a lot of these non-specific physical complaints, backache, tiredness, discharges from different parts of the body, complaints of excessive menstrual periods, and you don't find anything when you investigate, and then you put them on an antidepressant, it goes away. So the point here is that depression is a fairly common problem, but can manifest in very different ways. And of course, each one of us has our own individual personalities, and the way we respond to things can vary. And I just want to say that, this is not about putting blame on anyone or any society, but just understanding that there are slightly different prisms through which we look at things as human beings, but the object we're looking at could be the same, which could be major depressive disorder. Uh, Unlike what people think, major depression is a very common illness, and 1 in 6 Americans will have at least one episode of major depression in their life. And in a 12-month period, about 6.6% of this population goes through depression. This is a full-blown case of depression, and subsyndromal, that is, in between episodes, low-grade depression is pretty common too. Worldwide, depression is the 4th largest cause of disease burden. And that's quite strange. You'd have thought in a world of 7 billion people, the majority of whom live in less developed countries, it would be things like anemia or tuberculosis or malnutrition, but it's depression. Uh, when I trained in India, people would say, oh, this is a Western phenomenon. That's not true. People in India and China and Philippines also get depressed. And this illness causes or is related to job losses, behavioral problems in children of depressed parents. Uh, there's a condition called oppositional defiant disorder in adolescence, which is basically kids who don't behave or don't obey. Uh, And I've often taught that the best way to treat that is to treat the mother's depression or the father's absence from the family. Uh, it takes energy to exert discipline and control over children, and indeed over your own life. And when you're depressed and you can barely get through the day, it's hard to do. Depression is also related to substance abuse and crime, uh, homelessness, hospital bed days, and there are suicidal rates of suicide up to 10% of people with depression. Depression is related to marital violence and breakups and can even cause memory problems. Uh, Chronic depression causes uh, memory problems, the equivalent of having had two drinks. Can you hold on a sec? Yep. Uh, Sorry, that was my staff. So, what are the features of uh, clinical depression? Persistent low mood. Uh, for the diagnostic criteria, it is more than 2 weeks at a stretch, more than 50% of the time. Some people may say, I just feel numb, i.e., I have an absence of feeling, uh, or nice things happen around me and I just cannot get the same level of excitement about it. A lack of energy. Uh, Many people with depression will report waking up feeling tired and that persisting through the day. Now, higher functioning people will manage to drag themselves to do stuff, but I have an important question to ask them. Do you do the bare minimum you can get away with? And they often say yes. So they corral their energy to do the core things they need to do, which often for working people, especially working mothers, is just to get to work and come back. So when they get home, they have no energy to do the other things that are part of their role, which is manage the children, help with the house, be with the husband, sex life, etc. And that has consequences in all the other areas. The next thing is inability to enjoy life, anhedonia, absence of hedonism, inability to take pleasure in things. Now, it's not a total inability, it is often a reduction in that. Sleep problems, difficulty in falling asleep, lack of uh, continuous sleep or interrupted sleep, waking up too early. Sometimes it may be sleeping too much. Uh, about 20-30% of people with depression sleep more than is normal for them, but they still wake up feeling tired. Poor concentration, impaired work performance. Now, anxiety can be a part of depression, and especially in young or working age people, you'll find that folks with depression and anxiety will not take the more challenging route. They'll stay within the safe zone. So if you look at the life trajectory of, say, two siblings, one with depression and anxiety and one without, you'll find that the one without depression has gone ahead in life, taken on challenges, taken on difficulty or difficult new ventures, and have gone further ahead in their life. There's often a sense of hopelessness and demoralization, sense that my life has not amounted to much, uh, substance abuse, especially alcohol. And it's another aspect of depression. I didn't put it here. It's not about suicidal ideas, but a sense that life is not worth living for me. I often ask patients, if God were to come down and say, I'll make it okay with your family, with the people who love you, come with me, would you go? And the core question there is life worth living just for yourself? Or are you plodding on because of the people who love you and whom you love? There is another condition called generalized anxiety disorder, which can sometimes look like depression, which is chronic feelings of worry and tension. And this can go back decades. Depression is a condition that waxes and wanes. sometimes for months, sometimes for a few years, but they do remember, depressed people do remember times in their life when they were quite free of symptoms. In generalized anxiety disorder, it's a constant thing. And I often liken it to the alarm system in the brain being stuck in the on position. There's a sense of dread, there's something bad waiting to happen. Often people have multiple physical complaints, neck, back, and shoulder pains, panic attacks, your heart starts racing, you can't take a breath, and there's a lot of GI symptoms that go with GAD because your brain is what runs your insides, your heart, your lungs, your GI system, your bladder. And when that's in overdrive, you get gas and rumbling and butterflies in your stomach, diarrhea, constipation, needing to pee suddenly, and of course, sleep problems. So that's generalized anxiety disorder. What are the medical consequences of major depression? This is very, very well established that people with depression visit their family doctors, not psychiatrists or psychologists, family doctors, much more than those without. And this is for just, aches and pains, tiredness, malaise, that leads to people being investigated and tested for a variety of seemingly physical ailments while the problem is actually in the brain. Not that the brain is not physical, but you understand what I'm saying. Poor compliance with medical care. It is well established that folks with depression who may have, say, diabetes or asthma have a much poorer outcome than those without depression and the same illnesses. The outcome of treatment is much less well in folks with depression. It's been shown that if two people have a myocardial infarction, a heart attack, 6 months later, the one with depression is more likely to have a second heart attack than the one without depression. Also goes with strokes, higher risk of strokes, poorer blood sugar control in diabetes. In fact, in most conditions, most illnesses, if the person has depression, the outcome of the physical or medical illness is poorer in the person with depression than a person without depression. What does that mean in terms of COVID times? Now, as Dr. Zakharchenko said, we are somewhat out of the COVID pandemic, but it's too early to say mission accomplished, as we all know. There has been a staggering increase, as they called it, in depression and anxiety per Mental Health America. Strangely, across the world, from Japan to the US, there's been an increase in spousal abuse, which is sad, but true. Stress, the fear of COVID, uncertainty, financial trouble, social upheaval. Dr. Zakharchenko was talking about getting back to church, which my wife and I did about a month ago. And you talk to families with younger kids, they say it was so hard for people being stuck in their house 24/7 for 8, 9 months really became very difficult. And the lack of peer support. Yes, parents love children and vice versa, but parents need adults and children need children. In many situations where, excuse me, you're only seeing a video screen, it goes against our basic nature. And that's what I talk about, the idea of mirror neurons. It's been established that about 15 to 20% of our brain cells are dedicated to social connectivity. We are wired for social connectivity. And when we don't have that, there's something very essential that goes away, which is why being put in an isolation cell in jail is something that even hardened criminals just can't take. So there's sensory deprivation and lack of exercise, that all of which added up to the COVID burden that we've carried, and Dr. Zakharchenko spoke about these things. But having said that, if people have the symptoms that I talked about for major depression, which is persistent low mood, lack of interest, lack of energy, poor taste for your food, that's not always just COVID, decreased concentration, feelings of hopelessness, do go to your family doctor. Have them do a workup, get them to rule out other illnesses. There are plenty of medications that are available for treating depression. Unfortunately, the kind of well kept secret in the field of psychiatry is that only 2/3 of people, sorry, only 1/3 of people get full resolution of their symptoms with current antidepressants, which means that 2/3 of people have a small to modest improvement, but still have active symptoms, which is why we at Keystone continue to do trials, because we know that there's a vast unmet medical need for people who have failed antidepressant medicines. Exercise is a great antidepressant, but may not help you if you have clinical depression. Mindfulness, meditation, and prayer are very helpful. Talking to people, getting social support, asking for help. Your spouse may not be the best person to talk to all the time. And it may be your doctor, your friends, your children who might be a bit more uh, empathetic in these situations. So, to summarize, depression is a significant cause of personal and societal dysfunction affecting psychological and medical functioning. If you think you have depression, do go to your family doctor, get a diagnostic workup, try the medications we have, do get into exercise as tolerated, okay, based on your own medical condition. Mindfulness and prayer are helpful, and social and family support always help.
Thank you so much, Dr. Verghese and Dr. Zakharchenko. And thank you to everyone for attending today's webinar. Once you leave today's webinar, you will receive a quick 5-question survey. We would really appreciate it if you could take a few moments to provide your feedback so we can continue to improve in the future as we bring you more Vigor Wellness webinars. So everyone that's watching, you'll also receive a follow-up email tomorrow afternoon with a link to view a recording of today's webinar. You can view the webinar again and also share it with others. You can find recordings of our past wellness webinars on the Friends Life Care website. And I also wanted to let you know about our upcoming Vigor programming. Next Tuesday, May 25th, from 2 to 3 p.m., we will be celebrating our pets with a virtual pet party. Our next Vigor Wellness webinar, Fight the Bite, which will inform you how to protect yourself from the diseases associated with tick and mosquito bites, will be held from 11 to 12 a.m. on Tuesday, June 22nd. And on July 13th, we will begin a 6-week virtual Tai Chi class. The follow-up email you will receive tomorrow afternoon will have a recording of today's webinar and will provide a link to learn more and register to the other events that I mentioned. You can also register on our website. Thank you so much to Dr. Verghese, and thank you all for coming. Bye-bye.